Hello, students. Welcome to our lab activity on chemical reactions. Hopefully, you've been paying attention during the lessons this week, and hopefully, you will be able to not only write a correct, balanced equation for today's reaction, but you'll also be able to identify what type of reaction today's equation is all about. So let's get right to it. Obviously, we're doing this in a video format, a little bit unusual, but let's do the best we can. And I am going to have to provide you some data for you to record. So if you haven't already, open your books to page 132. Page 132 in your books. And the problem today states, how can a synthesis chemical reaction be observed? To help you out, I want you to review your notes and perhaps even the video from the first day of this week. Hint, hint. All right. But take a moment to review that information and then write a hypothesis in a complete sentence trying to answer the question stated in the problem. So pause this video until you've written your hypothesis. Welcome back. Now, I'll be doing all of the procedures here for you, but you should read through the steps yourself. But I'm going to have to provide you some of the measurements that you're not going to be able to take yourselves. Otherwise, you're going to make your own observations and write your own conclusion. So let's begin in this data table in your observations. And I will have to provide you some of the info here. So let's begin with the mass of the empty dish. The mass of the empty dish. You should write down that the mass of the empty dish is 40.0 grams. 40.0 grams. Once you've written that down, the next item on the list is the dish plus the copper powder that is placed into the dish. And the mass for that, 45 grams. 45.0 grams. Now, the next item there is the mass of the copper. And what I'd like you to do is think about this for a moment and determine how you can calculate from the information I've provided. How can you calculate the mass of the copper if I've given you the mass of the empty dish and the mass of the dish plus the copper? So take a moment and you can discuss with one another if you wish. How will you determine the mass of the copper? If you need to pause, do so while you figure that out. Now that you're back, I am going to explain some of the other things here in your observations. In a moment, I'm going to show you a video of the actual experiment taking place. So you are going to make your own observations as to the description of the copper as the experiment begins. But I will then tell you now, while we're on this same page, I'm going to tell you the next item, the dish plus the copper oxide mass. When the experiment is finished, you determine the new mass, and the new mass is 47.0 grams. 47.0 grams. As far as the copper oxide mass and the change in mass, that will be up to you to determine and calculate, as well as the description of the copper oxide when the experiment has been completed. And you also will need to explain for the change in mass. So I've given you all the data I can give you right now before we move on to the actual experiment. Now, unfortunately, I'm not in the lab right now to do this myself. I was able to find a video online. Let me just change my parameters here very quickly. And here I have a brief video that I'm going to show you of what this experiment looks like in real life. Now, I'm going to give you some bonus points if you can see in this video some of the lab safety issues that exist, issues that would not exist in our science lab. But if you can list for me at the end of this assignment and submit me some of the things that are wrong, and think about previous topics when we learned about lab safety, think about what lab safety issues might exist in this particular lab. But what I do really want you to focus on are the contents of this dish. Into this dish has been added straight elemental copper, but copper in a powdered form. So when I play this video, I want you to pay attention to the appearance of the copper as it zooms in a little bit, and then also pay attention, thinking about your hypothesis, pay attention to how you know if a reaction is taking place or not, and then make your observations at the conclusion of the video. That will be enough information for you to complete the lab. So here we go. Let's watch what happens as this copper powder has been placed into a ceramic dish and a Bunsen burner has been lit underneath. And boy, we shouldn't keep an open box of matches near a lit Bunsen burner. Not too smart. I don't know if you noticed that young lady in the back in the laboratory with no goggles on. Oh my, look at all of that paper nearby, an open flame, not good. But let's focus in on this copper. Do you see what's happening to the copper? Notice and look really carefully. You may have to replay it in order to see this a little bit more clearly, but I will say in real life, it is a fabulous alteration in color. I don't know if this video does it justice, but the tan powdered copper, as it is being heated, goes through a rainbow of changes before it gets to this black solid. And the black solid is no longer a powder. It is a black powder disc. So I'm going to get off the rest of those videos that might be coming to remind you, if you need to replay that little segment, think about it. Think about your observations for your lab and think about the mathematics. Remember, hint, hint, the law of conservation of mass here. What do you think is happening and what can account for any changes that take place? We'll discuss this later, but be sure to write down all of your information in your observation section. And I'd like you also to attempt writing a balanced equation for what you just observed. And you can feel free to use your notes from yesterday to get the starting point for copper plus oxygen. Cu plus O2 yields CuO. Think about that, write it down, and go through the 4 steps of balancing an equation in order to write the recipe for what was made in the lab today. With that in mind, when you finish today's lab activity, I'd like you to attempt some of the additional practice equations in your book until you feel as though you are starting to master those 4 steps to balancing equations. Anytime you have left over today should be used to study for tomorrow's quiz. And until then, I'll say bye-bye.